So there's a ton of misinformation out there right now about SB9. This is a law that allows California homeowners to split their lot and or build a couple houses where they could previously only build one house. And this is a good example. It's a comment from a video I got a couple weeks ago saying, hey, take this stupid video down. A judge struck down this corrupt SB9. And this is a perfect example. A judge did not strike this down. That is not how it works. A judge in the LA County Court found that 5 specific plaintiff cities, charter cities, didn't have to, that he found in the favor of those cities when they said, hey, there's some problems with how this rule is being applied. Now, because people are going way overboard and saying that SB9 is dead, that leads a lot of people to worry. And it leads people to worry that ADUs and other housing reform might suffer the same fate. I get it. There are cities out there like Redondo Beach that are lawyering up and finding ways to successfully fight the laws that make it easier to build housing all over the state of California. And laws like SB9 get a lot of attention when they first pass, so it's understandable that they get attention now and people are worried. But in a few minutes, you're going to understand that the rumors of the death of SB9 are a bit exaggerated. And I'll give you the script. I'll give you the outline in case somebody in your city tells you that this law is dead. We'll also talk about why ADUs should be resistant to this specific challenge. And we'll talk about what we can do to keep protecting ADU rules and other housing reform from this kind of challenge. So but let's look, and I want to make my shared screen smaller and take it out for now. So the big thing to know here is that SB9 is the bill that went into effect in January 2022, and a group of charter cities found a clever way to bring the constitutionality of SB9 to court. And if you're going to be worried that this is a complicated legal thing, I promise we're going to have great news for you. Anybody mature enough to follow a game of Simon Says should be able to understand what's happening in this case. And it's about that level of maturity. So every time the state of California, every time the legislature passes a law that interferes with a local jurisdiction's ability to do its own thing, the state has to explain why it's a matter of statewide concern and not just a municipal matter. And there's a boring bit in a lot of these bills that talks about legislative intent. And honestly, I usually skip over that part because it's not about like how homeowners can use the law to build housing, which is what we're all about on this channel. So a lot of the time I kind of gloss over the legislative intent, and apparently I'm not the only one. SB9 said that access to affordable housing is a statewide concern. That was its basis for the law applying everywhere, including charter cities. And so you can see the text that the legislators used. And the issue here, so Redondo Beach, Torrance, Carson, Whittier, and Del Mar, they were like, excuse me, this says affordable housing. And this law is about creating more housing at any levels of affordability. We think you should only apply, we think this should only apply if we're specifically being forced to create deed-restricted, below-market rate affordable housing, like capital A affordable. And the judge actually agreed with them. He said, yeah, that's right. If you'd said it's just about creating housing, that would be okay. Like if the legislators had said, hey, our intent is to create housing, so it's a statewide concern, then that would be okay. But the law says affordable, and therefore, if the intent is to create affordable housing, you have to create, and this the judge makes a big leap, says you have to create deed-restricted, below-market rate affordable housing. And so they went with Redondo on this one, and the other charter cities in the brief. So the court decision literally says you could have done this about housing, and then it would be constitutional. But because you said affordable housing, it's not constitutional. And the argument is a bit zany, in my opinion, because SB9 creates smaller lots by definition, right? You're splitting lots, and it creates smaller housing by definition. So it is more affordable housing. It's more housing, and it, by definition, like it's practically almost always more affordable. and it's increasing supply, which makes things more affordable. But the plaintiffs argue that capital A affordable has to be deed restricted below market rate. And the judge says, let's look at the text of the law. Every time the word affordable comes up, it's in the context of deed restrictions, covenants, and below market rate. So he sides with the plaintiffs. And that's why if the state legislature proposed a new law with all the same language, and they just took the word affordable out of the legislative intent, then this judge says, oh, well, then we wouldn't quibble. That new bill would be constitutional. But because you said affordable housing, and the law has to be narrowly tailored to affordable, and we're interpreting affordable to mean deed restricted below market rate, boom, there you have it. A bunch of lawyers get in a room and make everything even more complicated. Because we didn't use the right magic word. It really is like Simon Says, right? It's like, you didn't say housing before passing your law. You said affordable housing. So you go back to square one. Strictly speaking, it means that these 5 charter cities, Redondo Beach, Torrance, Del Mar, Whittier, and Carson, don't have to allow people to use SB9 in their charter cities. And if this ruling were appealed and upheld at a higher court, my understanding from the LA Times coverage is that it would then apply to all 120 plus of California's charter cities. And that's a really big deal because the 15 biggest cities are all charter cities. This is like LA, San Diego, San Jose, San Francisco, Fresno, Sac, Long Beach, all the way down the list. The 15 biggest cities are all charter cities. So if it did get appealed and upheld, that would be a really big deal, and it could slow things down. Now, having said that, at this very moment, a lot of big cities are still processing SB9 applications. I spoke to a company called Build Casa about this because they have built a lot of their business around helping homeowners and small developers with SB9 applications. And full disclosure, there's a potential sponsorship in the works there. If they pass all my vetting process, I'd be pretty keen to promote their product. And they didn't seem too worried. They said big cities are still processing SB9 applications. We're getting a lot of yeses, and it's been months since this ruling. So from their perspective, it's only the little NIMBY cities that are gonna run with this. And this is why I'm saying maybe the rumors of SB9's demise are a bit exaggerated. All right, then I think the other thing that's important to talk about is how this might apply to ADUs. By the way, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat. I see some folks chatting. Manuel, I'm so glad that this is helping. We can clear up the confusion. And Russell, I'm glad to see we've got people watching from Texas, but this does not apply. The SB9 in Texas that passed in 2022 has to do with healthcare, and it is not the same SB9 that I'm talking about in California. But good to know this is relevant in whatever state you're in, because the way to do this is to clean up the way we write our legislation. Deconstructing Dreams says, do you have housing codes legislation regarding ADUs? I'm going before the city council for Reno, Nevada at the end of July in favor of allowing ADUs and looking for arguments favor with as little restrictions. Sure. So Deconstructing Dreams, the AARP, the American Association of Retired People, they've got awesome model legislation for the state and awesome model ordinances for cities. So you can go to Google AARP ADU model ordinance, and that is a great example that you can bring to the city. Plus, politicians respect the AARP. It's a great lobbying group with a national presence and a good local presence, and almost everywhere where you might want to promote ADUs. So that's a great place to go. All right, and we'll talk a little bit more about that because everybody wants to know, does the ruling about SB9 affect ADUs? And as the Godfather in the chat has pointed out, the answer is no, because ADUs don't use the word affordable housing in their legislative intent. Here, we'll pull it up. This is the code that we find that governs ADUs, right? And you can see in the code that it talks about, can you see my cursor? Yeah, good. So the legislature finds and declares all the following. ADUs are a valuable form of housing. ADUs provide housing for family members, students, the elderly, in-home healthcare providers, the disabled, and others at below market prices within existing neighborhoods. Homeowners who create ADUs benefit from added income and increased sense of security. Allowing ADUs in single-family and multifamily residential zones provides additional rental housing stock in California. California faces a housing shortage. The state is falling short. ADUs offer lower cost housing to meet the needs of existing and future residents within existing neighborhoods while respecting architectural character. ADUs are therefore an essential component in California's housing supply. It is the intent of the legislature that an accessory dwelling unit ordinance adopted by a local agency has the effect of providing for the creation of accessory dwelling units, and the provisions in this ordinance relating to matters including unit size, parking fees, and other requirements are not so arbitrary, excessive, or burdensome so as to unreasonably restrict the ability of homeowners to create ADUs. And the last section is, it'll apply in charter cities. And yeah, and if you go to the findings, you can see all this on LegInfo and all the legislative websites. You can go into the findings and see that the legislators said, hey, ADU going to increase the housing supply. And that's what they claim. That's what their intent is. And so ADUs are safe. Even if it went in front of this judge who walked pretty far to condone the arguments of the plaintiffs, in my humble opinion, this judge, I would hope, would look at that and say, well, our legislative intent and the findings support our narrowly tailored legislation and everything's kosher. So that's why we don't expect that this would keep creeping into ADUs or other housing reform, which exhibits a more narrowly tailored approach to how the law responds to the legislative intent. And that's the short of it. So we're going to do a full-fledged video on this. If you have any questions, it's helpful for me to hear them now so that I can make sure to clarify in the full-fledged video that we put together. But this live is always an opportunity to answer questions. Deconstructing dreams. Did you find that AARP legislation I talked about? Let me pull it up. AARP Model Ordinance ADU. Here we go. So I'm going to pop that in the chat. This is the AARP Model Ordinance. You can use that. Obviously it needs to be tailored to your city, but it's a great document to give your city staff and say, this is a great starting point. And one of the good things about the AARP Model Ordinance and legislation is that it avoids a lot of the poison pills that get snuck into bills that it looks like a good ADU bill, but then there's one poison pill in it can kind of ruin it and make it really hard to actually build ADUs. So the AARP ordinance avoids that. Teresa asks, is SB9 and lot splitting the same? So SB9 is it means Senate Bill 9. And so the one that passed in 2021 and went into effect in 2022 was a law that allowed people to split lots in situations where they might not have been able to split the lot otherwise. A lot of lots. So I hesitate to say that they're the same because there are ways to split lots that do not use SB9. There are also things you can do with SB9 that don't involve splitting a lot. So SB9 would let you build 2 houses where you could previously only build 1. And that you don't have to split the lot to use that part. So it's there's overlap, but they're different. Yeah, good. Glad you got the model ordinance. Yeah, that's there's more model ordinances. There's one from an organization called ALEC, ALEC, and it's good. There's a ton of literature out there. I try to keep it simple. AARP is a good one. I love AARP. Most politicians know AARP. So those local electeds, it means something when you hand them a really well-produced doc from an organization that they're familiar with and that they know has political clout. So yeah, that's the drill. Thank you all for watching. I think if you have any questions, you can put them in the comments. Once the live is over, the chat won't work, but the comments below the video still do. We look forward to reading those questions and incorporating the answers into a full video. And yeah, I think, SB9's always had a lot of communication issues. People have been wrong about what the law allows since before it was ever passed. And it's been a bit of a communications nightmare. Great job security for the YouTuber, but really difficult communication plan. And even in its recent setback, it has been a miscommunication nightmare again. So we're happy to clear up the water. SB9 is not dead. It has received a significant challenge, and that challenge is limited in scope. Some legal scholars think that it will not stand up if it were to be appealed. And even if it did stand up, we could pass a new version tomorrow, almost not quite tomorrow, but we could pass a new version that stands up to legal scrutiny and is still constitutional. And even if that doesn't get passed, there are reasons why this legal argument could not be applied to ADU rules. And we have a lot of hope for the continuing winning momentum of housing reform in California and other states. Nationwide, states gave the ability to do land planning to local municipalities and counties, and state by state, they can interfere and take it back and regulate it. There's a lot that we can do in every state across this country to prevent localism from getting in the way of statewide concerns like housing availability. Yeah, cool. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a good one.